Hello, James here to go over a few math problems again. Hope everyone's doing all right. And if you have any questions, my email address will be at the end of this um, video. I hope you guys feel free to reach out to me. I'll be happy to help out with any questions you might have. So today I plan on going over estimating positive and negative square roots. In this section, we're looking into estimating positive and negative square roots. If we remember from the previous questions, integers are numbers that have a positive and a negative um, side to them. So, in order to be able to solve the positive and negative square root questions, it's I wouldn't say required, but it's helpful to understand how the line spectrum or the number line works. So basically, understanding that zero is the midpoint, and everything to the right is a positive, everything to the left is negative. And also, in understanding everything that goes to the left, you have to understand the bigger the number gets, the smaller it gets in quantity. So in a situation where they're asking you compare which one's bigger between -2 and -1, -1 would be bigger because it's closer to the zero or closer to the positive spectrum. So just keep it in mind. The bigger a negative number is, the smaller it is. So in this situation, we asked to evaluate the radical expression. Radical expression is another way of saying the square root. So in this situation, we're asked to find the negative square root of 36. Now, the situation of the negative being outside, all we would be doing is bringing the negative down while doing the square root inside. Inside here, we know that the 6 times 6 gives us 36. So in saying that, all we would do is bring the 6 out and say -6 would be our answer here. Similarly, when we look at something like this, which is giving us a plus and a minus, naturally, when we take the square root of a number, we usually have a positive bound and a negative bound. But for the simplicity of this course, if they're asking for something like this, they're asking for two answers, the positive and the negative. So bringing this sign down solves that problem for you. So now when we look at the square root of what's inside, 64, we know that 8 times 8 gives us 64. So like I just explained, all we would be doing is bringing this positive and negative down, and our answer would be positive and -8. Now, when we get to negative square root of 0, same thing. We're bringing the negative down while taking the square root of 0. Now, we know that the square root of 0 is just 0. So in this situation, after bringing the -0 down, we just say it's 0 because 0 has no two bounds. Now, in this situation, similarly, we're bringing the negative down after figuring out 9 times 9 gives us 81. So answer would be -9. Now let's combine our knowledge of the number line and the perfect square to estimate positive and negative square roots. In this situation, we're being asked which two integers squared are between negative square root of 190. Now, in this situation, what they're asking for is two integers that gives us the negative square root of a number. Similarly, like we did in the previous one, all we would be doing once we actually find the two integers that could be squared to give us a square root of 190, all we would do is bring the negative down to justify for those two numbers. So, square root of 190. What are two integers that could be squared to give us something close to 190? That when 190 is squared could give us the number between those two integers. Now let's look at this number line. We see 190. We're asking what two numbers could be squared, which is on the left side, to give us 190. We're looking. Bang. We see 13 and 14. 190 would be right in between those two numbers. So we could determine that 13 and 14 would give us something that could be square rooted to give us 190. So in saying that, like I said, all we would be doing is bringing that number down, and our ranges would be -13 and -14 because we were given this negative here to start off with. Now, in this situation, we're asked to estimate what the negative square root of 20 to the 10th place would be. In the previous video, I went over something similar to this, except the negative wasn't part of it. We were dealing more on the positive spectrum of things. Nothing really changes other than the way the number scheme works. If you remember, the bigger the number gets in the negative spectrum, the smaller it is, and the farther away it is to the left. So in this situation, what two numbers could be multiplied to give us something in between 20? We're looking in the number chart. We see 4 and 5. 20 would be right in between it, because if we square root this number, we would get something right here. So, in saying that, we know 4 squared is 16. We know 5 squared is 25. So, in this number line, we can see how the number gets bigger as we go to the left, with 16 being 4 times 4 squared, and negative 25 being 5 times 5 squared. Don't worry about the number, the squaring, because when we square numbers, it always comes up to be a positive. But because we're working in a negative range here, we're not going to worry about that right now. So to solve this problem and finding the estimated number that negative 20, square root of 20 would give us, we have our two bounds here, 25 and 16, and we're trying to get a number in between those. So we have to find a good number in between those to get us that range. And we concluded that the good number in between those would be 20, or negative 20 in this situation, because we're dealing in the negative bound of this problem. So negative 20. Now looking at negative 20 and knowing that we don't really have two numbers that are perfectly square to that, but we do know that 5 and 4 are in between those. So the question is, what number in between that would give us a good number that could be squared to give us the square root of 20, or the negative square root of 20? Because we're working in a negative range, we have 4.5 would be like the right number that matches up with that 20 here. So to similarly to our previous example, we concluded that 4.5 was the best number to give us the square root of 20. But because now we have a negative sign here, the answer would be negative 4.5, as we're dealing in the negative spectrum. And as you can see, the numbers are getting bigger, smaller as we get to the left side. We're asked to find the negative of 160 to the 10th place. Now, what we're being asked is, what two integers could be multiplied to give us something close to this? We know when we look at this chart, 160 is right in between 12 squared and 13 squared, giving us 144 and 169. Now, within the bounds that we have, we need to find a number in between them that could give us that close to 160. That's why we have the negative 169 here, negative 144 here. As you can see in the number line, it's getting bigger as we move on to the left side, because we're dealing in a negative spectrum. So we concluded that negative 156 will be the number that is close enough in between those two numbers to give us that 160, right? But we're not, and we concluded that that's going to be about 12.5 in the integer format. And the numbers that need to be squared, the integers that need to be squared to give us those numbers will be 12.5. But 12.5 is not, 156 is not exactly 160. 160 would be somewhere around here. So in saying that, we could conclude that the number would be somewhere around here. Similarly, like we did in the previous problem, we concluded that it's 12.7, but because we're dealing in the negative spectrum, or the negative bound, we concluded the answer is negative 12.7. So I kind of hope that gives you a good background understanding on how working with negative roots work. This is not exactly the negative roots that includes imaginary number, but this builds up to including imaginary number as we go. Again, my email address is up there. If you have any questions for me, please feel free to reach out to me. Thanks again for watching. Hope you have a great one.